Good morning, everybody. Sorry I couldn't be there today. For today's schedule, we have warm-ups, notes, and homework. I'm really hoping that this video will be helpful for everybody. That way we can stay on track and be able to get through everything that we had planned for this unit on time. So, for today's warm-ups, we had the problem of finding the factors of 4 different numbers. And the way that we're going to do that is by taking our number and dividing it sequentially by the numbers 2, 3, 4, and so on until we get halfway to our number. Now there is going to be an easier way to do this that we learn later, but for now this will get the job done. So if we take 28 and divide it by 2, we end up with 14. So those are going to be our first two numbers. Doing the same thing with 3, we don't get a whole number, so that's not going to be one of our factors. Moving on to 4, we get 4 and 7 as factors. 4 times 7 is 28, and those are going to turn out to be our last numbers in this set, other than 1 and itself. 42, we take the same process over again. We're going to have 2 and 21. When we divide 42 by 3, we get 14. So we're going to have 3 and 14. And then we don't get anything at 5, but again we get 6 and 7. And those are going to be the last of our factors other than 1 and our starting number 42. 29, this one is prime. So that means that our only factors are 1 and 29. For our last problem, 58, we divide that by 2 and we get 29. Now, if we end up with two prime numbers as our factors, we know that we are done. That's an automatic telltale that we don't need to go any further. So all our factors are going to be our 2, 29, 1, and 58. Now that we've completed our warm-ups, let's move on to the learning target and then the vocab for the day. For today's learning target, by the end of the hour, you'll be able to define and give examples of rational numbers. Take a moment to write this down. So for our vocab, both of these words were introduced yesterday. A rational number is any number that can be written as a fraction. Now remember, that fraction has a numerator on top and denominator on the bottom. The one thing that we have to remember with this is that n and d are integers. So that means they are going to be whole numbers that are either positive or negative. The one restriction that we have to have on those is that d cannot be 0. Remember, anytime we're dividing, 0 cannot be in the denominator. That doesn't work mathematically. Our next vocab word is relatively prime. Two numbers are relatively prime if they have no common factors other than 1. For example, if we had the numbers 8 and 9, the factors of 8 are 2, 4, 1, and 8. For 9, our only factors are 1, 3, and 9. Because the factors in 8 are 2, 4, and 8, and none of those show up in the factors of 9, these two numbers are both relatively prime. This is going to come into play when we try to simplify fractions. So we want to write that down. Used for simplifying fractions. So now that we know what a rational number is and what relatively prime numbers are, let's use this information to figure out how to simplify fractions. To do that, let's work with the simpler fraction of 3/12. Our first step is going to be find the factors of the numerator and the denominator. So find the factors of the numerator. I'm just going to abbreviate that as NUM, and the denominator. I'm going to abbreviate that as just DEN. So for 12, we list the factors 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 12. And for 3, our factors are just 1 and 3. Our second step is divide both the numerator and the denominator by the largest common factor. So in this case, our largest common factor is 3. So step 2, divide the numerator and denominator by the largest common factor. So when we do that, we divide 3 by 3 and divide 12 by 3. And on top we get 1, and on the bottom we get 4. Now, one thing to notice, to make our jobs easier, start by listing the factors of the largest number. So in this one we would start by listing the factors of 12, just like we did. And then once we get to the number that is smaller, in this case 3, we can stop. We have no need to list the factors 4, 6, and 12 because we know that those will not be factors of our smaller number. 3 divided by 4 is never going to be a whole number. So we can just stop after 3. That was our process for simplifying a fraction. If you're going to talk about simplifying a fraction, there's 3 different ways that we talk about it. One, we can just say simplify. We could also be saying reduce a fraction, or list a fraction in its lowest terms. All 3 of these are synonyms and mean the same thing. They are all asking you to simplify a fraction. And you need to remember, anytime you have a fraction written, it always needs to be reduced, every time. But how do you tell if a fraction has been reduced? A fraction is reduced or simplified if the numerator and the denominator are relatively prime. So again, in order to be simplified, or in lowest terms, the numerator and the denominator are relatively prime. So let's work through example 1 together in your Know It notebook. Your Know It notebook does a little bit of the legwork for you. It already tells you that 16 is a common factor because 1 times 16 gives us 16 and 5 times 16 gives us 80, which tells us 16 is a common factor. So we move on to our step 2. We divide both the numerator and the denominator by 16. And when we do that, we're left over with 1 over 5, or 1/5. Now in B, we're asked to find, or asked to simplify, negative 18 over 29. When we list the factors of 18, we just have 1, 2, 9, and 18. 29, we said that was prime in our warm-up, so the only factors there are 1 and 29. So there are no common factors. So that means negative 18 over 29, that's already reduced. And that means 18, negative 18, and 29 are relatively prime. Moving on to example 2 now in your notebook, we are asked to convert 5.37 from a decimal to a fraction. So what we need to do is look and see what place does this go down to. And we look, and 7 is in the hundredths place. So that tells us that the hundredths place, our denominator is going to be 100. So the place tells us the denominator. And the numbers after the decimal are the numerator. So for our fraction, we are going to get 5 and 37/100ths. Now this problem is easy. 37 is a prime number, so that's already in simplest form. But in part B, we are given a fraction that is definitely not in simplest form, or a decimal that is not in simplest form. So again, we look at our last decimal place, and that is the thousandths place. So we know our numerator is going, or our denominator is going to be 1000. And our numerator is going to be 622. Now, that is going to take a long time to find all the factors of. So I would just start with dividing by 2. And we would end up with 311 over 500. Those two numbers are going to be relatively prime. So that fraction is going to be our final answer. And filling in our information on the side, 2 is in the thousandths place, and we simplify by dividing by the common factor, 2.